Welcome to today's hybrid event, the official launch of the Green-Blue Alliance between the EU and the Pacific. My name is Héloïse Dubois. I work for the European Commission International Partnerships for the Asia-Pacific Directorate, and I'm delighted to be moderating this event. This alliance, the Green-Blue Alliance between the EU and the Pacific, covers 18 countries and territories, and it focuses on climate action, resilience, and the sustainable use of natural capital. We've had a consultation process conducted across the region with youth leaders, youth organizations, and we've asked them a very simple question. How can we increase youth participation in the design and implementation of the Green-Blue Alliance? Let me first introduce today distinguished guests. Physically present in Glasgow, I'm pleased to have Mr. Diederik Samsom, Head of Cabinet, to Mr. Frans Timmermans, the Vice President of the European Commission for the European Green Deal. We're also joined today by two youth leaders, Ms. Devila Talemai Maleya and Mr. Sebuloni Rokomatu Ratu. Ms. Talia Suarez will be connecting from Timor-Leste, and Ms. Vinzela Nen is joining from Papua New Guinea. The event is divided into two parts. We have first interventions from political leaders and then from youth leaders. First from the EU, Mr. Samsom right here, and then from the Pacific, the Prime Minister of Samoa, Honorable Fiame Naomi Matahapa. We will follow then with a series of intervention from our youth leaders. We're here to listen to their stories. They will share their personal stories and how climate change is so important for them, voice their concerns, and share suggestions to design and implement the Green-Blue Alliance. Finally, there will be an opportunity for dialogue between Mr. Samsom and youth leaders to discuss ways to increase youth participation in the Green-Blue Alliance. We do think future generations and youth leaders, involving them in a full engagement is actually the cornerstone for future successful collaboration between the EU and the Pacific to tackle climate change. Colleagues and friends are joining from the Pacific, from Europe, and all around the world to listen to this fruitful exchange to create a green-blue future. I give the floor to you, Mr. Samsom. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I was introduced as a political leader, but I'm not. I'm actually just a normal guy who fell in love with planet Earth in the Pacific. I have to take you back 26 years back in history when I was a young student in nuclear engineering. And when you study nuclear engineering, you learn to build a nuclear power station, and by coincidence you also learn how a nuclear device, a nuclear bomb, works. I studied nuclear engineering because I wanted to work for Greenpeace, and I thought my knowledge might be valuable to them. I wrote a letter to Greenpeace, 22 years old, and said, I might be worthwhile for you. That letter arrived at the Greenpeace offices at the day that President Chirac, then President Chirac of France, announced the restart of nuclear testing in the Pacific. So we jumped on a ship and sailed there. Well, the story about the nuclear test protest is actually not that interesting. What was interesting is that I was amazed for the first time in my life. I was really amazed by the beauty of that region, the vastness of the ocean, the incredible beauty of the islands there. I spent there 2 months, partly in a military prison on Moreau itself, but well, sometimes things do not go exactly as you wish. That was the moment that I did realize how fragile and how beautiful this planet is. So it's actually a very nice and beautiful coincidence that fast forward 26 years later, I'm here and I'm able to announce the start of this beautiful alliance, green-blue alliance between the EU and the Pacific. And it's also interesting because it's an example a concrete example, visible, tangible example of all the big things that are happening out here. In this Glasgow conference, we talk about mitigating climate change, we talk about adaptation, and we talk about helping each other. And obviously, rich countries should help poor countries to get through this journey, to make this endeavor together. And you can talk about that in big words and in big numbers, 100 billion euros, etc. But you can also talk about it in more concrete terms. So what can the EU do, literally, with all our knowledge, all our money, and our love for that region, in order to help you, to save your future? And obviously, that's a question that you can much better answer than we can ourselves. So I'm happy that this important part of this alliance is actually the consultation, and not just with everybody. Well, it should be with everybody, but in particular, it should be with youth. Because that's the other thing that struck me in the last, let's say, period of 2 years that I'm now working for the European Commission. I can tell you with 150% confidence that the momentum that is happening within Europe, but actually worldwide, on climate change is there only because of the young generation. They make the difference. The Green Deal in Europe would not have been there without youngsters being out on the street demanding action. But more than that, not only out on the street, also in our daily lives. The funny, what I did realize in the last 2 years building that Green Deal and all those legislation and finance and funding, etc. Obviously when you do that, you talk a lot with people that think they are very important. And sometimes they are. So you talk to CEOs of big car companies or high civil servants or ministers or even government leaders. And I can tell you, in all those conversations, at one point it turns to their own children. Their own children asking questions, small ones, about why do we eat so much meat? Is that really necessary? Isn't that polluting the planet? Or bigger ones about flying to Bali on a holiday twice a year. Why is that needed? But also existential ones. Hey Dad, what are you doing to save my future? And if that dad happens to be the CEO of Daimler-Benz, it's quite an existential question. The biggest car manufacturer in the world. And I can tell you, for a CEO of Daimler-Benz, a bad shareholders meeting is a bad day. And a bad headline in the newspaper is a bad day. But not being able to answer your own kids, that's much more than a bad day. That's existential. And I'm convinced that those voices and those questions are changing the world. Maybe even more than we as policymakers do in the Berlaymont building or all those other government buildings writing those legislations. That's the consequence of it. That's the last part. But the bedrock, the beginning of it, is the kitchen table where people talk to each other, where families talk to each other, and where young people raise their voice. Much more than my generation did. In hindsight, my generation should be a little ashamed of not taking the opportunity, not seizing the opportunity to change the world for the better. You are. You sitting next to me, but also all the others, you are. And therefore I'm happy that we now give you the opportunity to raise that voice also in a more formal way, which is boring and dull, I know, but also very important. And you know how to find your way because you already participate in this as youth leaders. And I can only encourage you to speak your heart, be radical, ask the impossible, because that's what we need to make the impossible possible. And let's take this example of this beautiful region. As I said, much more than just a beautiful region. It's an incredible part of the world. And our willingness to help and combine that into real action. So over to you. I'm listening, and I hope to be able to translate that later into real, tangible progress.
Many thanks, Mr. Sampson. Very inspiring intervention. We'll be hearing now from the Prime Minister of Samoa. Please bear with us while we try to face some technical difficulties. I believe it's fixed now. Thank you.
Youth representatives, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me thank the European Union for the invitation to provide a short address on the official launch of the EU-Pacific Green-Blue Alliance. I'm happy to see that the alliance reaffirms the special case of small islands developing states, and in this case, Pacific SIDS. Despite the vulnerabilities aggravated by the twin crisis of climate change and COVID-19, Pacific SIDS continue to demonstrate ambition for a low-carbon and resilient global economy. Furthermore, the alliance framework is developed from a convergence of values and principles of the EU Green Deal, the Pacific Protocol, and the 2050 strategy for a blue Pacific continent. The focus of the alliance, encompassing climate action, resilience, and sustainable use of natural capital as the basis for inclusive and sustainable economic development, resonate well with us under the overarching safeguards of the rule of law, human rights, and fundamental values. We are also in agreement with the key actions identified under the two main pillars. One, climate action, resilience and recovery, and secondly, inclusive and sustainable economic development. The actions also reflect the modality of delivery of the EU-Samoa bilateral relations. However, we would be keen to see how the alliance can engender the transformative power of the EU's Green Deal to the Pacific and consequently strengthen alliances with the region. We look forward to the implementation of the Green-Blue Alliance, particularly with the intention to adopt a combination of national, regional, and multi-country approaches, while emphasizing national ownership and ensuring capacity building in the countries of the region. We applaud the interest by the European Union to support and increase youth participation in the implementation of the Green-Blue Alliance. It is important to ensure that youth is not just a group to be consulted, but that they can be a pillar of consultations with the right outreach programs, leadership training, and enhancing awareness of climate change issues. It is also important for all our countries to consider what existing structures and modalities are there, where youth can support measures of environmental benefits and resilience building. During the preparations of our recently completed Universal Periodic Review of our human rights situation, we have come to learn of the importance of ensuring meaningful consultations with our stakeholders, particularly those outside the circle of government. This augurs for open information sharing, willingness to provide feedback in order to build knowledge-based capacities. The development of iterative participatory approaches through different stakeholder networks are conducive to sharing and capitalization of traditional knowledge between generations and the recognition of Pacific cultures, and heritage. Excellencies, the investment needs of the Pacific to achieve its climate and development objectives will exceed by far public funds and development grants available to the region. Hence, we expect to see a combination of modalities to be used, and that the Alliance will be the driver for policies and legislation, as well as provide incentives and support for their implementation. May you have a successful launch of the EU Pacific Green Blue Alliance. Soifua.
Many thanks, Prime Minister. We've just heard from the high-level political leaders, and what I heard and what would be my main takeaway would be the importance of engaging with the young generations. Mr. Samsam here brought us to the family kitchen table and made us accountable. What if our children start asking, hey dad, hey mum, what have you done? What are you doing right now to save the planet? The Prime Minister of Samoa did insist very much on, and for me the keywords would be the meaningful consultation with stakeholders outside the circle of the governments. She mentioned the youth as the pillar of consultation, with the right outreach program, leadership, training, and enhanced awareness of climate change. And I can assure you that we at the EU, this is exactly what we're planning to do with the design and implementation of this alliance, to involve the youth leaders in a much structured way and continuous way. The Prime Minister of Samoa also mentioned the importance of using existing structures and modalities. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. So I believe it's now the time to be in a listening mode, and let's hear from the youth leaders. They're all passionate about climate change, fully engaged in their communities. And we'll start first with Sevuloni. Sevuloni is the chair of the Pacific Resilience Partnership Youth Working Group. As a qualified humanitarian diplomat, he focuses on disaster risk management, climate change, health and safety, and of course, youth engagement. Sevu, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Moderator, and Your Excellency. Thank you very much for your remarks and for your earlier statement. Truly appreciate it. And it's good to know that you've made reference to the region and how development partners such as the EU value the Pacific, and in terms of your support and the engagement that you have provided previously, the current support that you're providing, and also for the future. And I would also like to acknowledge the Honorable Prime Minister of Samoa, Honorable Fiame, for joining us this morning, and also making reference to some of the work that is already taking place in the region, at the national level, at the regional level, and most importantly, making reference to the importance of engaging young people as a key partner in building a resilient Pacific. So that's something I hope to share briefly this morning, colleagues. We all know, I think we don't need to keep repeating, we all know that the Pacific is vulnerable to the impact of climate change. And also it's one of the most disaster-prone region globally. So the vulnerability is there. And also they are small island, states, lying atolls. So the vulnerability there is in terms of the impacts of climate change. We see sea level rise. The island nations in the region are experiencing it. They are seeing it themselves, and we are also seeing it ourselves. And also, most importantly, what we are also seeing is that the frequency and the intensity of tropical cyclones particularly is increasing every year, especially during the cyclone season. For example, we usually have the cyclone season that runs from November until April. Actually, we are already in the cyclone season in the Pacific, and most of the island nations, the different partners, governments, civil societies, and so forth, are already in preparedness mode for the cyclone season. So this is just to provide some context in terms of some of the things we are seeing, some of the things we are living through at first hand in the region. And I would like to bring in the perspective of young people into the discussion, as you've mentioned, Your Excellency, and also the Prime Minister of Samoa, the importance of how and why we should be engaging young people in these processes. What you'll see that the Pacific, we have a very youthful population. I can be honest to say that majority of our population are young. We have a youth bulge, especially in the small Pacific Island countries and territories. So this is why we see the value of engaging young people in processes such as in climate change action or in disaster risk management. We have a lot of youth networks, a lot of youth organizations. One of the group which I am part of, which Madam Chair has made reference to, is the Pacific Resilience Partnership Youth Working Group, where we have different youth networks, different youth organizations working at the regional level and also at the national level, who are very active, particularly in the area of climate change and also in risk reduction. So they are very passionate, they are very vocal in terms of why young people should be engaged in climate change. And honestly, I can also say that, we are getting there. The environment is there in the region. Our governments, civil society, other constituencies, we are working together to make sure that, together collectively, we can build a resilient Pacific. And that's where we see the importance of engagement of young people, particularly in climate change and also in disaster risk management. But also what we see in the region is young people are involved at all levels. They are leaders. They are very much active in leadership in terms of climate change action, intervention, even in programming at the community level. We see that a lot of young people are actively engaged in the region. But also, most importantly, they are actively engaged in their community. As we all know, in the Pacific Islands, we have villages, we have communities, the formal setting of each island countries. We have those in the rural areas and in the urban areas. And in those communities, the young people themselves, the youth themselves, are actively taking part. For example, when a disaster strike, young people take a lead in doing assessment, making sure that households that are affected get the relief items that they require. But also in climate change intervention, doing awareness, advocacy, particularly in terms of climate change, not only at the regional level but also at the national level, and what we are also seeing at the community level. So things are happening. We have existing structures. We had a Pacific Resilience meeting that was held in July early of this year, which was hosted by the Pacific Resilience Partnership, which is a governance arrangement that was endorsed by Pacific leaders to support and realize the implementation of the framework of resilient development in the Pacific. So young people are actively engaged with the countries and the different constituencies in trying to contribute to the implementation of the FRDP. So there was a youth outcome statement that was generated from the Pacific Resilience meeting, which was then fed into the overall outcome of the Pacific Resilience meeting. And that outcome statement, really reinforced the voices of young people from the region on what they foresee leaders, civil society, and other development partners should be taking action on in terms of addressing climate change and risk reduction. But also we acknowledge other youth networks. Even specifically for COP26, a lot of events had happened in the region, organized by young people themselves. There was a pre-COP youth gathering. There was also a Pacific Climate Justice Summit. There was also a USP pre-COP training. And also there were events that were organized at the national level. For example, Fiji had also organized a National Youth Climate Summit. So there were different outcomes, different statements that came out from these different youth platforms linking into COP26. So young people had actually, actively take part and participated in pre-COP events. So just to conclude, we would like to acknowledge the EU for the initiative of the Alliance. We see the value in the Alliance, particularly because what we believe is it will strengthen some of the work that we are already doing in the region in terms of engaging young people in climate action. So it's a great opportunity for us to engage and to be part of the Alliance because we can bring in the youth voices, as you've mentioned. We can bring in the experiences of young people into the Alliance, and most importantly, how young people themselves, how we can support the Alliance in terms of implementation and also taking action, particularly post COP26. Thank you.
Many thanks, Sevu. That was a very enthusiastic and vibrant intervention. Thank you for this. Now we're turning to De Villa. De Villa is the co-founder and executive member of the Alliance for Future Generation, which is a youth-led network in Fiji focused on empowering and inspiring young leaders to become agents of change. De Villa.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you, Your Excellency, Vinakasevu as well. So yes, my name is De Villa Talimai, and I'm from Fiji, specifically from Bautailevu, with maternal links to Navatuvula Neta Siri. Being here in COP, I'm actually also representing UNCDF and Sustainable Ocean Alliance. And growing up as a child, I've always been in love with the environment, and I've also grew up abroad as well. So the best time of the year for me was going back home, seeing my family, and enjoying the environment, the beach, and just, how shall I say, just enjoying my family. Because whenever you're living abroad, the one thing that you miss is your people, you miss the food, you miss your cousins and everything. So as a child growing up, that was my favorite part of the year. During summer break, I couldn't wait for the first flight out to come back to Fiji. So I've always been in love with the environment. I've always been in love with taking care of it. You could call me a tree hugger. I don't know, some people always say that. And as such, I decided to study environmental health, and it was a no-brainer for me to go into further my studies in climate change, because coming back home after spending around 20 years abroad, coming back home, seeing the impacts of climate change within my community, within my country, that really affected me. And I think the time that I really came into this climate change space, where I really wanted to have my voice heard, do something about it, was when we had Tropical Cyclone Winston in 2016. And I was a health inspector back then. And so then during that time, we would help pack food to take to communities. We'd actually go to the communities and see like the devastation, see people's houses destroyed, and we'd even see them living on tents. But one thing that really kept, there was like a positive aspect of that. Even though their houses were destroyed, even though they didn't have any clothes, they still, that communal sense was still there, and they still took care of each other. And seeing that and seeing how resilient our communities are, that really helped me push forward into being a part of the organization that I'm in, being passionate about the work, being passionate about the people within our countries. It's great to be in such a space here, an international platform, to express the things that are happening back home. but hopefully, like what I'm hoping with the Alliance is that we'll have this type of platforms with other youth within our region, within our communities, having these kind of discussions back at home as well. I think that's the most important thing. We can have these international discussions here, sharing our experiences, but where the most impact will be back home. And we youths, we are energetic, we have so many ideas, we're full of life, but some of the things that hinder us from implementing ideas or from starting our projects is financing, as always. And not just financing, but as youths, it's being able to access these finances. Often it takes a long process of paperwork and whatnot, or you need to have a bank account if you're an organization. And as youths, I think making finance accessible would be one of the key points that I would hope to see with this Green Blue Alliance. And sorry. So, okay. And another thing is also partnering with the implementing bodies that are already on the ground, already doing the work, rather than reinventing the wheel. And I think Civilone has already mentioned that as well. And the last part that I would like to express, or that I'd like to state, is a lot of organizations like to come and help communities, and one of their boxes to tick is including youths. And those are one of the things that, it's a form of tokenism, where they just come and say, oh yeah, youths are here, we did the project, and they leave. And as such, one of the things that I would want to include is to provide research funding, specifically focused on youths, and how their engagements in their communities is actually effective, and how you can improve it or enhance it further. And I think that's my last. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Davila. We heard you loud and clear. Access to finance, the importance of having the dialogue at country level. So many thanks for your intervention. We're turning now to Dili, Timor-Leste. Talia Suarez, she's the project coordinator of climate change at Plan International. She's passionate about climate change and has experience in capacity building in civil society organizations on gender equality and climate change. Talia, happy to see you. Over to you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Before I introduce myself, I would like to thank the EU, Mr. Samson, Her Excellency of Samoa, the Prime Minister, and Heloise for giving me this opportunity to be part of this amazing event. So my name is Talia Suarez, and I'm from Timor-Leste. I've always had a strong passion for climate change issues and environmental protections. And I used to play a role for Daily Model United Nations, where I represented as Germany for the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change Committee. And I love the UN debate of climate change issues, where we showed our negotiation and leadership skills, which truly showed our passion towards climate change issues. And sorry. And that was when I boosted my passion towards climate change issue, especially in Timor-Leste. And Timor-Leste is my home, and is still susceptible to natural disasters and vulnerability to fragile shocks to environmental external shocks, environmental and the impacts of climate change. That is the reason why I wanted to focus on climate change issues for my career development. Right now, I'm currently working at Plan International Timor-Leste as a project coordinator of climate change adaptation under the project of EU-funded project on strengthening the capacity of local CSOs on climate change adaptation. So under this project, I manage the activities in the field, organize and lead community meetings and workshops, and also facilitate dissemination of climate change adaptation that works closely with the community and village councils, and also related to project committees. From my experiences, youth participation is very limited at the community level, especially in rural areas, due to lack of awareness of climate change issues. There's a program from Plan International called Girls Alliance, where they empower girls, boys, young women, and young men to strengthen their voice by consulting with the sponsored children from our main municipalities in Ainaru, Aileu, and about the program and mobilizing them to establish girls groups in the community. And they also provide leadership training to the Girls Alliance members in order to improve the capacity building. And they also organize and implement their activities through public campaign and media campaign. Therefore, to support and increase youth participation in Green Blue Alliance, we should apply the same approach from Girls Alliance program. We should work with the GA to engage active young generations, especially young women, girls from schools, from Ainaru and Aileu, because when it comes to issues like this, girls and young generations are not included in this part of thing. So therefore, we should be provide them training to enhance capacity building, develop advocacy strategies that addressing the climate change issues, and also to implement the Green Blue Alliance seminars with the government, non-government, and youth participation at the municipality level to help build the confidence to take actions and to speak out on the climate issues that affect them, their environment, and the ecosystem, and the economic aspects. So there are two pillars of Green Blue Alliance, and they are climate ambition, resilience and recovery, and inclusive and sustainable economic development. As we all know, climate change impacts us negatively and the environment, and is also a significant threat to the national and global economy. So therefore, both aspects are very essential. Green Blue Alliance can be more strengthened by continuing to increase public and policy awareness of climate change impacts in the community, especially in the rural areas, and to ensure involve the local authorities and national authorities for greening initiatives, and also to reinforce the national capacity to develop environmental resilience to climate change by conducting training, socializations, and workshops. And also to strengthen by integrating climate change adaptation actions into development policies, plans, and programs. In addition of mobilizing the domestic and external financial resources through advocating better sharing on climate change funding. So as I mentioned before, I'm the project coordinator for the current EU-funded project that I'm currently working on. So this current project, the overall objective is to actively promote civil society organizations, activities, and policies that are gender sensitive and socially inclusive of preparing for and responding to the impacts of climate change in Timor-Leste. So we have some achievements received from this project so far, and it's still an ongoing progress because the project finishes on the February 2022. So far, we have increased the community, especially in the rural areas, have increased the CCA knowledge, awareness, and practice of the civil society organization participants in training from 13% to 88%. Also, the communities, including the vulnerable groups, have implemented climate smart responses and adaptive action plans within the community. Also, 8 schools from the municipalities and 17 target villages have completed hazard vulnerability capacity assessment. And also, we have a number of national level workshops that were carried out with the Minister of Education, MAF, CSOs, and other stakeholders to support the CCA curriculum package development. And so far, we just received the good news today that the Minister of Education have improved the CCA curriculum package development, and it is to be established at the national level. And this CCA curriculum focuses on third cycle from grade 7, 8, and 9. And last, we have also implemented nursery plants in 13 target villages of Ailiu and Anaro. So far, we have been receiving so many positive feedbacks from the community, national and local authorities. If we could build upon this project in the next 7 years, I believe that the dissemination of CCA messages and the mitigation of climate change actions will be widely spread in Timor-Leste. And not only that, but this will also help Timor-Leste's. This will also help with the economic growth by creating jobs in Timor-Leste. And I think that's all that I can say for my part. And thank you so much for listening. And yeah.
Many thanks, Talia, for sharing your experience, including with Girls Alliance. We see a very interesting approach here. We're turning now to Vinzi. Vinzi, connecting from Papua New Guinea. Vinzi is a poet and a climate activist. She's involved in a youth-led organization called 350 Pacific, as well as UN high-level meetings. And for her, and we heard it before, access to information through youth platform is actually vital in the fight against climate change. Vinzi, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Mr. Sampson and Her Excellency Fiame Matafa from the Prime Minister of Samoa and fellow youth delegates, and thank you to our moderator. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vinzilla, and I am a climate activist and poet from Papua New Guinea. So my story begins in 2005 in a third grade classroom. So my teacher told me stories about how the waves crashed through our house. So it reminded me a lot about my own home, about what's happened in my local community, and also it sort of opened my eye to what was happening to the environment. And she gave me a new term for a 9-year-old. She mentioned global warming. So I came home and I talked to my father and my uncle about it. And my father tied it back to mining in our land. So we come from a local community that's a mining community now. It's past the exploration stage, and now they're going into the stage of extracting gold from our community. So he linked it back onto if we did not make proper decisions, our land or the small island surrounding island Papua New Guinea would be affected. And it was a bit complex for me at that time, but my uncle, who was studying marine engineering, he explained further about the ecosystems and mangroves and all that, enough for a 9-year-old to grasp and understand. So that sort of was the beginning of my journey into caring about the environment and sort of wanting to do better for the local community. So it has been so many years since I raised those questions with my father and my uncle, and I've gone on to do a lot of community outreach, not just within my own local community, but also in other local communities in Papua New Guinea. And it's a topic that still, sets my soul on fire, and it's something that I'm really passionate about, and I continue to be passionate about, and I try to think of innovative ways in how I can get more participation from youth, considering that this is the future that we will be inheriting. So youth have a lot of ideas generally, and also the energy and the drive and the motivation to sort of carry out the ideas that we have, especially in a time when innovation and technology and all this is crucial. Unfortunately, for a country like mine in Papua New Guinea, culturally, young people are not often given that space due to certain limitations. Back in the day, we had initiation, which allowed us to take part in discussions or decision making. However, in today's day and age, it seems that that initiation process is prolonged for young people. So in order to have more young people in the Green Blue Alliance, I believe more community-based outreach should be done in a sense where we have a lot more networking events with the young people in the local communities. And I say this because a country like mine, Papua New Guinea, the state does not own most of the land. Most of the land is owned by tribal groups and clans. So one point raised in the Green Blue Alliance was creating jobs. However, for the Pacific, or mainly for my country, it's very difficult because we have very unrealistic job prerequisites, or should I say expectations or experience levels that young people should have. And as a result, young people are often left jobless. So having dialogue with young people within these local communities and see what they have to say, see what we need, it sort of gives you an insight on how you can better help the young people, or how we can reach the goal of trying to create job opportunities for young people. Apart from having community dialogues, another way would be to get those youth active already in the space of climate action and already in the space of being passionate about the environment and speaking for the environment, for the oceans and the forests and everything else, to sort of have them involved in government discussions and decision-making processes. I'm sorry about that. Many times we have, sorry.
It's all good. Yeah.
So many times we have young people who are very diplomatic. However, we're not given that space to sort of express ourselves and to sort of be heard. So having that bridge mended it would sort of build that bridge and fill out that gap that's already there. I resonate a lot with what the Prime Minister for Samoa said about having to deal with the existing frameworks. That is true. However, working together with the young people and the older generation, you sort of have an insight. So the older generation have more of a perspective of what they want, the vision that we want, whereas the young people, we have that energy and the drive to move us towards the goals that the older generation have. So I believe that finding that balance is one of the answers as to how we can achieve a lot in terms of our environmental goals. And another way, of course, would be to have other mechanisms such as ecotourism, textile design, art, and music. Those are very effective ways on advocacy and addressing the environment or the climate crisis that's happening within the Pacific or the small island states within the region. So in my country, the European Union has done so much. They've been established since shortly before independence, which is almost a century, half a century. And they've lived up to their purpose in trying to eradicate poverty. So the EU, some of many of the things that I've done for my country, they've built 200 schools, 36 health centers, and 40,000 employment opportunities through the EPA and TVET centers for the underprivileged students who couldn't make it to the tertiary level, and 3,400 human rights defenders have been trained professionally. And that's to name the few of the many things, as I've mentioned. Many of these projects were to help my government eradicate poverty. Currently, the EU is involved in projects such as STRAIGHT, which is to empower the local plantation owners within the country to keep them sustaining their lives, but to also not take up much of the forests. And that's a major cause of this deforestation within Papua New Guinea, is that we have 80% of our population, they depend solely on subsistence farming for their livelihood. So we try to, or the EU tries to work around that. And they've also have projects like WASH, where 30% of the population in Papua New Guinea do not have access to clean water, whereas 70% do not. So they try to work in these ways to sort of eradicate poverty and sort of bring services and to fight some of the environmental problems that we have within the country. The Green Blue Alliance has two pillars, one of which is to enhance the climate ambition and disaster risk management, which I believe the EU in PNG is already doing in terms of its partnership with NARI, the agricultural body, the government body for my country, to better manage crises such as droughts. Also to develop a stewardship model of reconcile biodiversity, environmental protection, and sustainable development, enhancing the economical growth within the country. And these are examples that can be seen in projects such as Straight and Wash, and they reflect the two pillars of the Green Blue Alliance. And they're all linked by finding alternatives for better storage solutions for bilas. Bilas is the traditional, we kill a lot of animals for traditional outfits that we have. So they try to also come up with solutions as to how we can better store our traditional bilas to not sort of harm the environment more, to not harm the environment or to not kill a lot of animals. So the EU has done so much that they can, and they have delivered immensely. They've done so much for my country that I think many times we often confuse them to be our government rather than our own government. So to conclude, I would like to call on the leaders of my country as well as the leaders of the Pacific to communicate with organizations such as the European Union, as I feel that they have our best interest at heart, and to help the small island communities, because most times we're ignored on the world map. And given our small landmass size, this means that if we have to do capacity building ourselves, let us do it, because we cannot continue to let these opportunities pass at the expense of our people. Help is at hand. There is help everywhere. Let us do our bit in making progress within our country and also within the region. I also call upon the young people like myself that we are going to inherit this future, and watching and criticizing our leaders will not improve that future that we want to inherit. Let us start making our mark, making that decision, and start working alongside the organizations that are already doing something within our country. And let's start building that momentum. In that way, the baton that is passed on to us, and we run the country, our country, the way we want to run. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Many thanks, Vinci. Wow. I don't know you, but I'm really inspired. And we're going to use the last 5 minutes for this dialogue between Mr. Samson and our 4 youth leaders here. Mr. Samson.
Well, thank you. I've listened with amaze, because so much wisdom comes out of this young generation. I guess not for nothing you are young leaders, you show to be. So thanks for that. What I'm now sort of puzzled with, or what I would like to ask you is, how can we move on from here now? I mean, I hear you a lot about access to information, access to finance in order to organize yourselves, etc. I think we can do that. I think we should. That's a must, a conditio sine qua non, as they say. But how can we move on making those projects happen? I was actually inspired by Nen from Papua New Guinea, who mentioned already the projects that we are doing. For me, those projects are the ones from the 90s and maybe the 80s even. What are the projects of 2020 and beyond? What is concrete work that we should help you to make happen? Is that more about climate adaptation, or should we also move more into a sustainable economy, a sustainable future? Waste, water, energy, those are the things that we are struggling with here in this continent. Mm-hmm. Maybe you do the same there. What is the best way forward for us?
Thank you. That's a very good question, and thank you. Yeah, I think firstly, in terms of structures and processes, one of the best way, if I speak from the regional perspective first, it would be building on the existing mechanism and processes and structures that we already have in place. I think that will really help us to facilitate some of the support that will be provided from the regional level. And secondly, also at the national level where the action takes place, I think that's very well, and we definitely agree with you. One of the things we are looking at post-COP26 is how we can support our leaders, our governments, our civil societies, and other constituencies in taking action and implementation. So I think climate action is, of course, one of the priority area, and things such as looking at supporting adaptation work, even on mitigation, particularly at the community level, even linking it with risk reduction, so that communities themselves are able, can have the capacity to be able to respond to the threat of climate change and also to natural disasters.
How do you respond to sea level rise? What is your response to such an existential thing as sea level rise? I actually don't know whether that's most prominent in Fiji. I know obviously it's very prominent in the Marshall Islands and elsewhere in the Pacific. How do you respond? What's the solution? You can't level your island, or can you?
No, well, in Fiji we already have communities already relocating, and there are around 40 that have already been identified to be relocated, and we've already relocated 2, and that's actually relocation. It's the last resort adaptation.
Yeah, and you're already into that.
Yeah.
Right now.
It's the reality in Fiji. And when you ask us how we're responding, it's through being here. Our leaders are, and us as youths, we're demanding for, the developed countries to stick within the 1.5 mark. All we can do, because mitigation is, as a Pacific, we contribute the least to carbon emissions. Yet we are the ones who are being impacted the most. Not just Fiji. Oh, sorry.
Many thanks, Davila. I'm very sorry. I'll have to interrupt you ahead of time. I'm getting signed here. This shows the enthusiasm, right, of the discussion, and it is just starting. So I guess the main takeaway for you today is really we're very serious, and we really want to fully engage the youth. After all, we have not inherited our planet from our parents, but we're borrowing it from the future generations. And this is what this is about. Now the launch is over. Now to action. Thank you very much. Thank you all.